to it or underneath it for. Okay, so absolute value.
Like a V, right?
Yeah. The absolute value is the distance from 0, right? So you can think 0, and if you have like a negative 5, that distance is a 5.
Yeah.
Like 20 somewhere here, right? That is a distance of 20. So this means absolute value, okay, of x is the situation, right? And then our graph, 1, 1, 2, 2, negative 1, 1, negative 2, 2, 0, 0. Okay? And if you end up with a negative of any sort, it just flips itself. That make sense?
Yes.
Now, I'm just going to do a quick little bonus for you here if you want to write it on this back side over here because it's going to lead into this quadratic page. But this is what I call the movement of our graphs, okay? So if I take this one, I always tell my students, whenever I teach you math, there's always going to be the easiest, most basic, standard way of starting it, okay? It's like the basic model. Okay, the basic model for an absolute value is this one. Not that one. This is the negative one, right?
Yeah.
But the basic one we always is a positive, and it's a unit, meaning a 1, right? There's a 1 in front of this technically. And it's just a regular number, okay? So what would happen, there's two ways we could talk about this. If I wanted to move this dot and move it over here. So what we end up with is we get the v, but it starts now at 1, 0. What would our equation now be? What would change?
The number in the middle.
Okay, so now instead of it being x, what happens to x?
You take the absolute value of it, right?
Well, think of it this way. When I put in a 0 here, right, I got a 0, right?
Yeah.
But right now I'm putting a 1 in here, and I'm getting a 0. So what do I got to do to this x in order for me to move it to 0? I got to subtract 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you notice, if I take my original unit, right, and I subtract a 1 from it, it shifts to the right. Because 1 is the starting point. Do you see how 0 is your starting point here?
Mm-hmm.
We shifted it to 1 by making it x minus 1. If I wanted to start at 10, I would x minus 10. Does that make sense? So if I wanted this to be at 10, this would be it. That make sense?
Yeah.
If I want it to be negative 8 here, what would I do?
Add.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Yes.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to on there draw graph 1, right, or the middle one, that's the regular one. You could draw 1 to the side. Be careful and make sure that you point out. Here's another way of looking at this.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the parentheses, you're now concerned with what is I call the negative space. X minus 10, 10 becomes the value that creates a 0. And it's a space that is actually what is needed to make it a 0. Right? So it's like the hole in here is a 10.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
So that's where we start. Cool?
Yes.
Now here's the next fun part. What happens if I want to move it up and down? This one's usually the easy one. Let's say I have this and I move it up to a 5 and I still have the same.
Don't you have like a number on the outside? So like, yeah, like
Good.
that.
Okay? So this is the up and down.
Up, down, yeah.
Shift. You can say plus C if you want. Okay? Write that down as well.